I want to talk about what is my favorite topic. I didn't send out a survey for that. But here's what's interesting. So years ago, the way I started writing books, here's how I got to California. Years ago, always wanted to be a writer, and I was speaking and not writing, and so I called my journalism teacher from high school there in town, because that's where I was, and I said, hey, how do I get in the rhythm of writing again? And this was 2012, and back then blogs were a thing. She said, start a blog, and just the discipline of that will create that to happen in some way. And so I did, and then it kind of grew in popularity. But here's what's striking to me. I don't know if this is when the technology was kind of first arriving to where you could see how many people clicked on the article, how long they spent on it, so whether or not they read it, you could see if they shared it or not. And so it's a very telling thing, because you want to write things that are meaningful to people. I mean, there's no reason to write an article if nobody's going to read it. And so here's what I found very quickly. Whenever I wrote about faith, everybody shared it, nobody read it. When I wrote about sex, everybody read it, nobody shared it. So basically, they wanted grandma on Facebook to think they were holy when they really weren't. But there was one topic that I would write about all the time that nobody would read nor share. And that's tonight's topic. And it strikes me, it's the topic of decision making. And what intrigues me about it is this is an issue that you and I are dealing with on an unending daily basis. And most of us, generally, we don't have many classes in school specifically geared toward decision making, depending on what your actual maybe major was. I'll never forget, I had an ethics class in seminary. Yes, they teach ethics, hard to believe, but I had an ethics class in seminary. And so we walked in the first day, and the professor said, all right, here's how the class is going to work. Every class period, you're going to have read a short story of a real-life situation, and then the next class, you're going to come in, you're going to have written a little bit about it, and then we're going to debate what should have happened, what shouldn't have happened. So that night, we read a study, and the study was this. A doctor has a patient who is very ill, who is terminal, and is in a tremendous amount of pain. And to get that person to have a chance to alleviate some of the pain, the doctor would have to give a dosage of the medication, which could, not guaranteed, but could actually kill the person. What do you do? And in this case, the doctor tried to give the medication. The patient did not react well, and she actually did die. And so we get into class, and now we're debating, did he make the right decision or the wrong decision? What should happen? And there was this guy in this front row who was emphatic that the doctor should be arrested, taken to jail, lose his medical license. Another one said he should lose his medical license. I'm just kind of sitting in the back, quiet, right? And so finally, it all came to a conclusion, and the professor said, okay, I'm glad you weren't the DA, and I'm glad you weren't on the medical board, because I was the doctor. And every case study for that semester in ethics was a real-life case from his own life. And he helped us begin to navigate, how do you make godly decisions? But to my knowledge, that's the only class I ever had specifically on decision making. Yet we deal with this every single day of our lives. And so I'm wondering, why is it that I'm so passionate about it and a majority of the people don't care about it? And part of me wonders if I'm actually biased, if I'm skewed in some way, that because I spend so much of my life dealing with the poor decisions of others, if that doesn't now bias me in this situation. But think about this for a moment. If you have children, is there anything maybe more important for them to understand than how to make wise decisions? You can see it on the sheet there. I don't know if they would still say it at this point, maybe it's changed, but if you would ask my kids whenever they were in school, what's the most repeated line your dad says on a regular basis? Whenever they were little, it was good choices lead to good consequences. Bad choices lead to bad consequences. I wanted them to feel some agency over their own lives and to recognize that they weren't helpless as they walked into that school day. I'll never forget walking Ella and Silas to school one day, and you've heard me tell the story before. I would turn to Ella and I would say, Ella, if you make bad choices today, there's going to be bad consequences not only at school but also at home, because she really didn't care. And then I would tell Silas, hey, if something happens at school today, you get in trouble at school, you won't be in trouble at home. Just calm down. Everything's going to be okay. They looked at life from different perspectives. But I'm walking them to school one day, and out of the blue, Ella looks up to me and goes, thinking about making some bad choices today. Well, okay. That's your business. But there's going to be some bad consequences. If that's true of our children, how much more true is that of us? And if it's our desire for our children to figure out how can you make wise choices in this world that's full of foolishness, that the inside of us is full of foolishness, there's temptation all around us, and we desperately want them to navigate this world to the best of their ability to bring glory to God for their own flourishing, for their own well-being. If we look at our children in that way, how much more does God look at us in that way? I mean, think about it. The very fall of humanity is about poor decision-making. And yet, when was the last time we read a book about it? And here's the great trick of this whole thing, I think, in many ways, is we are deceived into thinking that we are naturally good at making decisions when the long history of humanity, of the Bible, and our own lives proves otherwise. And this is something that we can actually make a difference in. And yet we tend to choose not to. But what would it be like if we had the ability to look at the craziness of this world in our lives and to see things that other people don't see, and to be able to not only make wise choices ourselves, but then to assist others to do the same thing? William Ury is a Harvard, Yale professor. He actually kind of helped with the Camp David Accords, all the major national, international peace treaties that had probably been made over the last 50 years. William Ury was probably involved in some way, more recently with North Korean President Trump and all the negotiations that went in there. He tells the story about a long time ago, a father with 3 sons in the Middle East, and the father was rather wealthy in that time frame, and the father died. And he left his estate to those 3 sons, and in that kind of culture, you wouldn't leave it equally in that way, and so he left half of his estate to his firstborn, a third to the middle child, and 1/9 to the last child. And the prized possession of that whole estate were 17 camels. And so the brothers, after the grief and after the funeral, gathered together to now separate the estate. And now it came time for these 17 camels, which in modern day currency run about $10,000 to $15,000 a piece. And they looked at it, and the oldest son said, all right, I get half of those. Half of 17. How many are you going to get? And then the middle son said, all right, I get a third of those. How am I going to get my third? 3 doesn't go into 17. Then the youngest son said, all right, I get 1/9. Well, again, doesn't divide by 2 or 9. So they were at a standstill. They didn't know what to do. So there was a wise old lady, a family friend that was in the community. So they went to her and they sat down and said, here's the plight. And each son began to make the argument of why he deserved just a little bit more than what his dad had promised. And finally, the wise old lady said, look, I don't really know how to solve the issue that y'all have going on. And these are issues that you're going to have to work through for yourself and get comfortable with yourself. I don't know what to do. Here's what I can do for you. I have 1 camel. If you'll take it, just see if that helps. Sounds ridiculous, so they take the camel, they go back, and the next day they wake up and they say, all right, let's try this again. And they look out and they see 18 camels. And the oldest said, I get half. All right, that's 9. And the middle one said, all right, I get a third, that's 6, so that's 15. And the youngest one said, all right, I get 2, so that's 17, and they have 1 camel left over. And they took it back to the old lady. What would it be like if you had that kind of wisdom? That the issues that lead to gridlock within your own relationship, you have the ability to look beyond just your own personal desire and beyond even some of the false parameters that sometimes we create, and begin to look at the big picture, and we're able to determine what is a wise choice and how to move forward. Learning how to make wise decisions, which underneath that then comes in the concept of learning how to do problem solving, is one of the most important skills a couple can learn. And notice this, it is a process and it is a learned skill. And if you and I will engage in learning how to make wise decisions, not only will our lives be better, but so will the lives of others. So let's begin to look at just a couple reasons of why decision making is hard. What is it that makes it difficult? And the first one is there isn't a clear process. There's a variety of ways to make decisions, and even individual decisions can look radically different. We can see this for individuals. We can see this for family. We can see this in organizations, in countries and communities, for the world at large. How we make any given decision could be radically different than any other decision, and so that leads us to literally having no processes whatsoever, and then that makes it difficult. We also assume that everyone sees the world the exact same way that we do. We don't recognize that people have different perspectives, different upbringings. We don't recognize how temperament plays into how we see things and even what we value. Even certain words can mean radically different things. The word money, as we talk about money, a concern for many of us in our relationships. For some, the word money means safety. I want money to feel safe. For others, the word money means risk. It means opportunity. I want money to take a chance. So we assume everyone sees the world the same way that we see the world, not recognizing perspectives, personalities, different experiences, even how we use specific words. Those kind of things have to be defined and to recognize that people have something to add in many ways. So we just assume when it comes to decision making, you feel the same way I feel. And if you don't feel the same way I feel, most of the time, we then assume not just that you're different, we actually assume that you're wrong or you could even be evil, right? And that's what makes decision making so difficult. But then also, we don't understand the process of biases. That we all have these biases that are impacting how we go about making decisions, and they impact us in a very real and also a very negative way. And one of the key aspects now of making wise choices is going to be able to find a way to recognize and then negate the biases that we all experience. So I just put 7 down here. There's a whole lot more than this. Thinking Fast and Slow is a great book about biases. You need to put it in ChatGPT and ask it to be summarized because it's extremely lengthy. But it helps us in things like this. So the first one is confirmation bias. So here's what that means. You and I tend to very quickly form an opinion, and then we search out information that will verify that opinion. So instead of seeking out information that's going to confront what we think is right, we actually seek out information that's going to confirm what we think is right. Now, we could debate how long ago, but some years ago, news organizations realized this about humanity, and so they began to create news stations to confirm whatever it is that we thought was true so that they could make money off of us, right? And so people ask all the time, not just this year, but in every year, I will always give this answer. Somebody will say, well, how was the State of the Union? And I will say the State of the Union speech was whatever you thought it was going to be going into it. Just guaranteed. If you thought it was going to be great, you probably thought it was great. If you thought it was going to be horrible, you probably thought it was horrible. Why? Because we are looking for information to confirm the opinions that we already have, not information to educate us or confront us. And then now on top of that, because this is a bias of humanity, now we have all these tech companies, all these companies now who are trying to profit off of that very thing of confirmation bias, to where they will begin to feed us information that confirms our beliefs, whether it's true or not. They really don't care if it's true or not. They care whether or not it's profitable. So confirmation bias is, matter of fact, the Heath brothers, who wrote the book Decisive, which is one of my favorite decision books. It's not a Christian book by any means, but it's a great, all truth is God's truth, right? So it's a great book on decision making. They would say confirmation bias is the biggest issue whenever it comes to making wise or foolish decisions. That we tend to just operate out of this, nothing else really, and that's what leads us into foolishness. Now, the other one is an anchoring bias. And so that's the concept of, this is why in sales, you always want to anchor the first price out there, you want it to be higher. Because whatever is put out there first creates a boundary from which we are going to forever figure out if we got a good deal or a bad deal. It's why, I mean, everybody does it. I have a website. I will do it. Hey, this is $25.95, but I'm going to give it to you for $19.95. Well, why didn't I just say from the get-go, this is $19.95? Because I want you to think you made a deal. And so by throwing out the initial price, we can't help but then be swayed by what that initial price is, and it anchors us to a reality that isn't necessarily reality, and then from that we start to negotiate and figure out whether things are going well or not. So whatever your first opinion is becomes an anchor, whether it's true or not, and that influences who we are. An overconfidence bias, and that overconfidence is we have an overconfidence in ourselves. We just assume we know. We may not have any idea what we're talking about. Consider this. Let me show you the truthfulness of this bias. If you're a sports fan, Arkansas just won in the SEC tournament. That's not the reason I left stage. I'm not that good of an actor. But here's what fascinates me about sports fans, of which I am one. If a play doesn't go well, my first thought is, that was a bad play call. And then I will quickly begin to think, that coach doesn't know anything. Whereas, I haven't been at practice. I don't even know specifically what play was called. I don't know if all the players did exactly what they were supposed to do. I don't know if the quarterback or the point guard changed the play that was called. I don't know the defense. I can't even technically tell you every position that's on the field, but I am over here as an amateur who my only experience in college athletics was playing college golf. Now going, that football coach who has devoted his entire life to this and whose whole career is based on him getting things right, he must be an idiot. Why is it that when experts, and I'm not saying experts are always right, but why is it when an expert says something, why is our first opinion when we disagree with them, they're wrong, instead of asking the question, I wonder what they know that I don't? That's overconfidence. That's just overconfidence. Now, again, it doesn't mean the expert is right. But when I walk into my doctor's office and he says, hey, Kevin, I've seen this a lot recently. We might want to run this test. Well, in that moment, I go, man, absolutely, you know. I don't know, you know. And yet, when my boss makes a choice that I don't necessarily know all the decisions about, I can very quickly go, well, he's wrong about that. Good guy, trying his best. He's wrong about that. Where I wasn't in on half the meetings he was in on to know what that decision was even based on. That's the overconfidence bias. Here's my encouragement to you just on that issue. In a loving way, begin to call each other out on that. Just to draw it to your attention. So the next time you're watching and you're like, well, let me get more personal. My mom, I mean, not real personal because it's not going to be about me. My mom is at the house a couple months ago, right? And we're watching a basketball game. And she goes, that's walking. I said, okay. And then she's like, that's walking. I said, Mom, it's not walking. She goes, no, look at it's walking. I said, they changed the rule about 15 years ago. She goes, that's legal now? I said, yeah. But she's sitting on the couch assuming these professional referees are continually getting the same call wrong instead of wondering, I wonder if they changed that rule. That's overconfidence bias. And we all have it. and it's impacting in a negative way our decision making. The availability heuristic. And aren't you glad I didn't make this a fill in the blank? I should have made this a fill in the blank just to see your attempts at spelling heuristic, right? And so what this means, availability, is this idea of what's right in front of us. And we tend to overvalue what is right in front of us and make the assumption that this is the norm and anything else might be the exception to some extent. And so if you grew up in this church, you will think this is what church is like. This is just every church. We know they're bigger and smaller, but this is just generally what church is like. When in reality, there ain't nobody like this. Good and bad. Like this is an odd duck in many ways. But if this is all you ever grew up around, you think everything that happens here is what the norm actually is. So we overestimate the information that is readily available to us to assume that we have a majority of the information, when in many cases we have very little of the information, and actually the information we have is actually the outlier information. And so we overestimate what's going on there. Herd mentality. It's why when your neighbor buys a new car, you're tempted to buy a new car, whether you know it or not. I remember years ago, the book The Millionaire Next Door said one of the greatest indicators of the car you drive is the car your neighbor drives. But it's not like anybody is waking up of a morning going, have they bought a new one yet? It's not that. It's that we see it. I was talking last night in the premarital class, and I gave them just a caution that divorce tends to be contagious. That it tends to run in circle groups, that you just have to be aware of it, careful about it, not to ostracize those who are going through it by no means, but when friends are going through that, to recognize that there is a temptation within that. I don't fully understand all the ramifications that then could cause us to begin to question our own relationships. And so there is this concept that everybody around us, as they start to doing it, it normalizes what is taking place and makes us more likely to begin to think, oh, that's the right way to go. That's one of the dangers, by the way, of social media, is social media can begin to normalize what is actually very abnormal behavior. And then it just makes it feel like, well, there's a lot of people doing this, so should I. The other one is status quo bias. So we tend to be biased toward that which we already know. And the way this expresses itself on many occasions is, for many of us, we would actually rather repeat the pain we know than risk the situation that we don't know, even if it may not be painful. Why is it that even in relationships, we tend to run back to poor relationships? Because at least we know it in some way. And so there is this idea of the status quo that we don't even recognize. Think about this. If you work outside the home, are you going to work tomorrow? Well, chances are yes. So tomorrow you're going to choose to work for that company. Yes. Why? Why? You don't have to. There's a lot of other jobs. We live in an economy right now where jobs tend to be pretty available in many ways, and yet we don't wake up every morning thinking, do I want to work for them today or not? We tend to gear toward the status quo, but the problem with that is, while there's some ease into that, the downside of that is we could be missing out on a tremendous amount of opportunity and never even recognize it, and it's just a human bias to keep on doing the same thing that we're doing. I can speak from my own experience. Remember, I'm not a change guy, 19 years in the same office. There is a power of change. There is a power now to have new patterns and routines and experiences and all those things, but we tend to lean toward the status quo. And then number 7 is the sunk cost fallacy. And that is the idea that once we invest in something, that even though that money is already spent, we will lean toward continuing to see that play out. I'll never forget, back in Arkansas, we're trying to get an interstate built from New Orleans to Canada is the goal, and it was going to come right through our neck of the woods. And so here was the plan, literally, of the city leaders. If we can just get some money budgeted to do 1 mile of this, take it, get it paved, and then get another mile. Because there comes a point where you can then go to Washington and say, hey, y'all have already spent all this money. You don't want it to be a bridge to nowhere. you've already spent all this money, then you're more likely to get more money. Not based on where population growth and patterns and what's going on. It's just this idea, we've already spent all of this, it would be a waste to stop, then we should continue. When in good decision making, you're not really taking in consideration how much you have spent in the past or even what has happened in the past. The question is, based on right now, is it wise to spend this dollar in this direction or not? And yet humanity can't take the idea of loss. We have a far greater bias toward not losing than winning. It's why if you're a golfer, that you probably make more putts for par than you do for birdie. Because if you miss your par putt, it's a bogey, that's loss. So we tend to be more aggressive with the par putt. But with a birdie, if we blow it by and miss the comebacker, then we've lost something. So we'll tap up, we'll lead the birdie just kind of up near the hole. We have an aversion more to loss than gain that impacts how we make these decisions. These 7 biases and many more impact how you and I make decisions on a regular basis. Now, let's look at a few things that then makes decision-making even more difficult. And the first is disconnection. Disconnection prevents us from focusing on the issue. Working with a couple in the last few months, and they were having an extreme difficulty, but they came to me for a very specific reason. There was an issue that they needed solved. They needed a solution. So I listened to kind of what was going on. I picked up on what was going on, but then I quickly then redirected. And the reason I kind of agreed to see them, I'm not a marriage counselor, but the reason I agreed to see them is they just needed one issue solved. They needed what to do in this situation. I tend to be able to help in that scenario. So as they were talking, I said, all right, about this issue, what do you think success would look like? And what do you think success would look like? And as they were trying to find success, here's what kept on happening. She would say, well, I want to do this, but he's going to do, and now hang on. I didn't ask that. I just asked, what do you want? And then I would turn to him. All right, well, what do you think? Well, I want to do this, but it's no use because she's always doing it. Hang on. And what happened is they kept on veering off of the issue at hand and back to the pain that was going on. And I have complete compassion and understanding of what's going on. It's because when our sense of attachment, our sense of connection with one another is threatened, fight or flight kicks in that mode in that moment. And it becomes, attachment is a greater issue than anything else that we're facing. And so if you feel disconnected from your spouse, it's going to be very difficult to handle money, to handle frequency in sex, to handle parenting situations, to make a wise choice about where you're going to live, about what you're going to do, all those things. Because you don't have the brain power and the function in that moment to stay on task with the issue because you were frightened and you were living out of fear because of the disconnection that is there. And yet whenever we feel connected, then we can refocus on the actual issue at hand. For many of you, you think you have a money problem. You don't. You have an attachment problem. It expresses itself in money. For many of you, you think you have a problem with intimacy and sex. You really don't. You have an attachment problem that is expressing itself as sex. For many of you, you might think that you have a communication problem. You don't. You have a disconnection problem that expresses itself now in poor communication. That's why we talked about early on in the very first session, this idea of attachment precedes. Emotionally focused therapy precedes cognitive behavioral therapy, because just to learn the skills, if you don't have the connection, isn't going to matter. But once you get the connection, then the skills begin to matter. So disconnection can prevent us now from focusing. Emotional dysregulation, as we talked about in a previous session, you try to talk to the 3-year-old having a tantrum. You can't. You can't communicate, and if you can't communicate, you have very little chance of actually problem solving or making a wise choice. And it's almost the exact same as the person who is overstimulated, throwing the tantrum, yelling, screaming, throwing things, with the person who is completely emotionally shut down and checked out. You also have very little chance of having a good, productive conversation with that wall over there. But that's how some of us get whenever we are dysregulated. But if we'll learn to emotionally regulate, then it will improve our chances of making wise choices. Poor communication. If you can't listen, if you can't state what it is assertively, what you desire or what you think, if you're passive, causing them to always try to guess what's going on, or if you're aggressive, now almost forcing them to shut down and to stop listening, then you can't be productive in what's moving forward. And there's many decisions that must be made together. I think about this from a stay in your lane concept of in the, I was going to bring that up, right? So in the carpool lane, I can't be there without somebody else in the car. And whenever I think about my life, there are some decisions that only can be made with me and Jenny in the car. We have to be together. Now, there's other things that I can make on my own with her advisement. There are other things that she can make on her own with my advisement. There are other things we're just going to do and really probably not even talk to each other about unless a problem arises. But there are some choices that we have to make together. And so in that moment, you have to have the ability to communicate. And if you don't, you're going to be making a decision without understanding the passions and the desires and the experience of what your spouse is. And many times that sets us up for failure. Selfishness. If you're not making a decision with the best interest of your spouse at heart, you're not going to make a wise decision. And many poor decisions are born of a selfishness where we are forcing our way for what we want, and it in no way feels like a win-win, and that always comes with a price. It comes with a cost. The other is destructive patterns. That's what we talked about before, the common fights to find the bad guy, of what Sue Johnson calls the polka protest, right? And those kind of things that we get into these patterns where we might start in a good way, and we're going to try to figure out what the right decision is, but before long, one of us gets emotionally dysregulated, we get defensive in what is taking place, and maybe we shut down, or maybe we get too overstimulated in what's taking place, and now we just keep on coming in these patterns to such an extent that then leads to avoidance, to where we know, we can't go there. Here's a simple test for your relational health right now. Is there a topic in your marriage that is off limits emotionally? That you just know, we can't go there. And here's my encouragement to you. If there is a place you cannot go in communication with your spouse, get help. There should be nothing off limits. I can't think of a single thing that Jenny and I can't talk about that's off limits. There's just nothing. Now, it doesn't mean every conversation is fun. Doesn't mean we just can't wait to have that conversation. But what it does mean is there's nothing out of bounds. For some of you, you've had this experience that we can't go down that road. If we go down that road, chaos is going to ensue. Feelings are going to be hurt, all those things. And it's okay in other relationships to have roads you can't go down, or you choose not to go down just for the sake and the well-being of the relationship, right? I mean, it gets us through Thanksgiving, right? You can't have that political discussion with your uncle. Don't do it. You just know better. Don't do it. You don't need counseling with your uncle for that conversation. Your uncle needs counseling. But with your spouse, there should be no paths that are off limits. Because here's what happens. If there is, that will begin to erode into other areas. And so you begin to learn. And here's the beautiful thing about a biblical counselor, a clinical counselor, a pastoral counselor. They can be objective and can assist you to point out, hey, that you don't want to say it that way. Hey, be careful. You're shutting down. Now, come on, I want more of you. All right, no, let him talk. One of the things I do all the time with couples is I will ask a question, and there's few things that irritate me more than when I ask somebody a question and somebody else tries to answer it. No, I ask her or I ask him. I don't let them talk. And that helps begin to see the destructive pattern that is taking place. Sometimes we don't give each other the time that's necessary. Attempting to solve perpetual problems. So remember, this is from a previous session where we used Gottman's language about solvable problems and perpetual problems. Remember, perpetual problems are not a right and wrong, a moral absolute. Perpetual problems are, you come from one background, I come from another background, I have one personality, you have the other personality. We see life differently, and in those moments, we should be contributing to the understanding of each other. And yet, if you and I are trying to solve the differences that are in temperament rather than the differences of right and wrong, we're running down a treadmill we can never come to an end to. And so in that moment, we're actually trying to win something that we should be influenced by. And for many couples, one of the great strifes of their relationship is they are robbing themselves of not getting the experience of their spouse because they're trying to convince their spouse that they're wrong about that issue instead of understanding why their spouse believes what they believe. It's also true of politics in America. Competition, number 8, competition rather than collaboration. So some of us, if we come from a family background where we lost a lot, then every serious conversation will become a conversation that we try to win. Because we've learned if we don't win, we're going to pay the price. So if you have a non-secure attachment, whether it be anxious or avoidant, if you have a non-secure attachment, chances are you can be highly competitive, whether you recognize it or not. And you see all discussions like this as there's a winner or there's a loser. Now, sometimes because of a non-secure attachment, you just recognize I'm just going to lose. And you just give up because you don't want to actually engage in the conversation. If you're more like me, it's okay, if that's the game we're going to play, let's play it. Let's go. Whatever. We're in staff meeting. We're having a discussion. All right, I'll win. Let's go. Well, what would it be like if we didn't try to compete with each other, but instead we try to collaborate with each other? What would a win-win situation look like in this scenario to where everybody benefits? Everybody might sacrifice some, no doubt, but everybody benefits and is on the same team as we begin to move forward. With the major decisions of life and marriage, you need to feel this collaborative kind of effect. When Jenny and I were deciding in Birmingham, Alabama, graduate school, we graduated, we're trying to figure out where to go next. And there were plenty of opportunities and options all over the country of places that we could go to, including one in my hometown. And you know, normally pastors go, their families go wherever the pastor has a job. And I remember telling Jenny, look, there are sinners everywhere. I can work anywhere. Why can't we go where you find a job? She's career-minded. And so we basically said, look, we like the job in Arkansas. We think it'd be great to be around family and do all that. But we're not going to accept the job unless Jenny gets a job there. And so when we got in the moving truck in Birmingham, Alabama for the 8-hour drive to Arkansas, Jenny had 3 great job offers. We would have not have taken the job unless she had those offers. All 3 went away on the drive there. God can do whatever God wants to do. But the mindset was, what if the rest of our lives, now she probably would have been fine with this. Remember, Jenny's a spin the globe, put your finger down, that's where we're going to move, right? I'll live on either side of my mother, right? So those are our personalities. So, but imagine if Jenny's life was nothing more and nothing less than moving wherever I wanted to go next in my career. Eventually, you would think that she's going to grow weary of that. At what point do we move for her? At what point do her dreams and her passions and her career come first? Well, or can we navigate it to where in all situations we want to collaborate on this decision, and if we're not both for this, we're not going to do it. We're not going to move forward. This isn't, by the way, let's just make this clear in the evangelical world. It is not the husband breaks the tie. That's just sheer foolishness. It's not that, because here's the thing. Churches don't operate that way. We have elder boards, and if the elders aren't in uniformity and unanimous about the decision on big ones, we don't move forward. Well, why wouldn't Jenny and I operate that way? It's not that we each get a vote, but my vote breaks the tie. No, on the big issues, it's, are we on board together? If we're not going. And we're going to figure out whatever is next. But I think a tremendous amount of destruction has been done within the Christian church for promoting this false concept of that's what headship looks like in the Bible. That's not what headship looks like. Headship looks like complete submission and sacrifice and service. It looks like Jesus, not this idea of it's my way. So that whole idea of competition rather than collaboration is a tremendous danger.